Welcome back to Klepper's Corner. Today in history. Today, June 16th, history proves collapse rarely arrives with a tasteful announcement. It shows up as a bad marriage contract, a locked theater door, a broken empire, or a clipboard insisting the conquest is legal. Segment 1, and empires learn the door is not locked. The great myth of empire is that it is permanent, which is adorable because June 16th keeps producing empires that look less like marble monuments and more like group projects nobody finished. In 455, Rome reached the climax of its 14-day visit from the Vandals. After Emperor Valentinian III was murdered, Petronius Maximus grabbed the throne, forced a marriage, insulted the Vandal king Genseric, and then tried to flee when consequences arrived by boat. That is not strategy. That is lighting a cigar at a gas pump and calling it confidence. The Vandals, to their credit or horror, did not invent modern vandalism that day. They negotiated with Pope Leo I, skipped the massacre, and treated Rome like an estate sale with better helmets, hauling away gold, roof tiles, captives, and the last illusion that the Mediterranean still belonged to Rome. Then, in 632, the Sassanid Empire put young Yazdegerd III on the throne after years of civil war and a catastrophic fight with Byzantium, hoping a child king could stabilize a state already making collapse noises like a washing machine full of coins. 8 days earlier, Muhammad had died in Medina, and the Arab Muslim armies would soon redraw the region, while Yazdegerd spent his reign fleeing east until he was killed in a mill for his purse. And in 1487, England tried to end the Wars of the Roses at Stoke Field, where Yorkist diehards rallied around Lambert Simnel, a 10-year-old fake king. Henry VII crushed the rebellion, then refused to execute the boy and put him in the royal kitchen instead. Nothing punctures a dynasty like finding out your messiah is turning the king's rotisserie chicken. Segment 2, and empires discover the return policy. Once empires stop looking eternal, they start acting like terrible landlords, moving borders, seizing deposits, and insisting the lease says they own the hallway. In 1745, New England colonial militia and a British squadron captured the French fortress of Louisbourg, the so-called Gibraltar of the North, a stone reminder that Europe had exported grudges to a continent that had not requested a subscription. The colonial troops were under-equipped, so they captured French guns and used those guns to blast the French fortress apart, which sounds heroic until London gives the fortress back to France 3 years later. Imagine building the IKEA bookshelf yourself, then your boss gifts it to your rival because diplomacy needed shelving. A year later at Piacenza, Austrian and Sardinian forces crushed a French and Spanish attack because they had intercepted the enemy plans and waited in the mud with the answer key. Thousands marched into irrigation ditches expecting cover and instead got a scheduled disaster. In 1755, Fort Beauséjour fell after a British mortar shell found the supposedly bomb-proof casemate during breakfast, because war loves nothing more than ruining both your defenses and your eggs. That surrender helped give British officials the excuse they wanted to deport the Acadians, proving empires often call a tragedy administration. And in 1897, President William McKinley signed a treaty to annex Hawaii after American-backed planters had overthrown Queen Liliuokalani. When the Senate math looked bad, annexation later moved through a joint resolution. It was conquest by parliamentary side door. Imperialism wearing reading glasses and whispering, technically, this counts. Segment 3, and the world refuses to follow the plan. Human beings love a plan, which is unfortunate because history has the emotional maturity of a raccoon in a ceiling fan. In 1811, John Jacob Astor's trading ship Tonquin sat in Clayoquot Sound after Captain Jonathan Thorne managed to turn diplomacy into a bar fight by insulting the Tala o Quiot and slapping a chief with a pelt. The resulting attack wiped out nearly the whole crew, and one final survivor lured attackers onto the ship before igniting the powder magazine, blowing the Tonquin apart in an act of mutual destruction so grim it should have come with a warning label reading, "Do not combine arrogance, explosives, and frontier capitalism." 4 years later, Napoleon Bonaparte won his final victory at Ligny, beating the Prussians but failing to destroy them. That small failure mattered because Field Marshal Gebhard Leberecht von Blücher survived being pinned under a dead horse in the mud while French cavalry rode over him. His aide hid him under a cloak. Then the 72-year-old was revived with garlic, rhubarb, and schnapps. Less a medical treatment than a dare from a tavern menu. Blücher then marched toward Waterloo, where Napoleon discovered that mostly defeated is not the same as defeated. And in Gujarat in 1819, the Allah Bund earthquake killed more than 1,500 people and shoved up a massive ridge across the Rann of Kutch, redirecting water and trade routes overnight. Humans draw maps, nature replies with masonry. It is the planet's way of saying, "I saw your 5-year plan and made a wall." Segment 4, and panic becomes public policy. Sometimes society fixes the obvious problem only after the obvious problem has done the worst possible thing, which is why reform so often feels less like wisdom and more like a receipt from a disaster. In 1858, Abraham Lincoln accepted the Republican nomination for Senate in Illinois and delivered his House Divided speech, warning that the United States could not remain half slave and half free. His friends thought the line was too severe, too dangerous, too politically suicidal, which is how you know it had a decent chance of being true. Lincoln lost the Senate race, but the speech gave the country a diagnosis it could no longer politely cough over. In 1883, the Victoria Hall disaster in Sunderland showed how deadly bad design and cheap crowd control could be. More than 2,000 children attended a show. A toy giveaway triggered a surge, and a partially bolted stairway door trapped children at the front. The tragedy killed 183 children and led to emergency exit reforms and the panic bar, a device whose philosophy is, maybe the door should open when people are screaming. In 1933, after thousands of bank failures and panicked runs, President Franklin D. Roosevelt signed the Banking Act, creating the FDIC, even though he had worried deposit insurance might reward reckless bankers. He was not entirely wrong. Finance does have the survival instincts of a raccoon near a shiny trash can. But the guarantee restored trust, because capitalism works better when people believe the bank is more than a vault with vibes. And in 1941, Roosevelt ordered German consulates closed across the United States, signaling that diplomatic neutrality had run out of chairs. The pattern is brutal but familiar. Denial, damage, then a rule that sounds obvious after everyone has paid the bill. Segment 5, and modern life gets a brand manager. By the 20th century, June 16th starts to look less like kings losing crowns and more like modern life acquiring logos, screens, soundtracks, and escape routes. In 1903, Henry Ford incorporated the Ford Motor Company in Detroit, while Caleb Bradham registered Pepsi-Cola the same day in North Carolina, giving America two promises: motion and sugar. Ford had already failed twice. Pepsi began as a pharmacy stomach remedy, and together they formed a pretty accurate national business model. Build the car, sell the drink. Then spend a century pretending traffic and caffeine are freedom. In 1911, the Computing Tabulating Recording Company formed, later renamed IBM. And before it became synonymous with mainframes, it sold time clocks, scales, and meat slicers. The computer revolution, apparently, began as a deli counter with ambition. Culture was rewriting itself, too. In 1904, James Joyce and Nora Barnacle took the walk that became Bloomsday, proving one good first date can become either a lifelong romance or a novel people carry around to intimidate strangers in coffee shops. In 1960, Alfred Hitchcock premiered Psycho and turned horror inward, making the polite motel clerk scarier than any lagoon monster. He even banned late seating, because nothing sells terror like punctuality. In 1961, Rudolf Nureyev escaped Soviet handlers at Le Bourget Airport and leapt into French police custody, turning ballet into Cold War defection with better posture. In 1963, Valentina Tereshkova became the first woman in space, surviving a software error, bad food, bruising re-entry, and Soviet makeup departments trying to airbrush orbital trauma. And in 1967, Monterey Pop opened with Jimi Hendrix burning his guitar and Janis Joplin detonating the room with her voice. Modernity did not end chaos. It put it on stage, sold tickets, and called the encore progress. In conclusion, June 16th gives us a clear pattern. Empires fall, officials improvise, technology overpromises, culture mutates, and somebody insists the door was probably fine until the crowd arrived. The past is a committee meeting during an earthquake, where the snacks are sponsored by Pepsi, and the emergency exit opens only after everyone agrees it should have been unlocked.